Now, I've bigged her up enough. She's named Penny, but she is priceless. She's a rising star. Here's Laurie Penny of the New Statesman to speak about the great sexist debate which is now broken out throughout the land. Laurie, welcome to the show again.
Hello, George. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm interested in your point of view on what happened, what it tells us about Britain today, and then I'm going to ask you about all the hypocrites that are now joining in. But tell me, first of all, just exactly where you stand.
Well, I find it interesting because I was one of the first people to come out and say that Andy Gray should be fired for his comments. Because I think, well, firstly, if you're talking from a professional point of view, this is a man who clearly can't do his job representing, all the thousands and millions of female fans and female players of football out there, because he's just basically, dismissed every woman who plays football.
He doesn't seem to like women very much.
No, he
There's
really
a sort of venom in his voice and his actions.
There's a contempt. Contempt, and I think more to the point, part of the way that this has developed as an argument is people saying, oh, he said these comments, but actually it's just what every man says down the pub. No, I don't think every man says this kind of thing down the pub, but I think quite a lot of them do. And I think actually that's the really dangerous, important point here, is that there are a large number of men, not all men by any means, but there are a large number of, social circles in which this kind of thing is normal and accepted. And I think, Germaine Greer, whose writing I do have a lot of problems with in some respect, but I think she was absolutely right when she said that, if women could hear the way that men talk about them when they're not in the room, they would be absolutely shocked at the level of hate and the level of sort of jokey contempt for women that takes place, when some men are in the company of other men of the same mindset. And I think that's what people have reacted against in this case. And the shocking thing is that it is still very normal. 100 years after the suffragettes first marched.
What about the issue? First of all, let me say Andy Gray was a brilliant footballer, and I think he's a brilliant summariser. And I've been listening to him for nearly 20 years on Sky. So on that level, I'm sorry he's gone. I don't think he'll be easily replaced. That's presumably why Sky were paying him £1.7 million a year, which is no mean salary for being a second man, a summariser
I'm sure he'll
football
find a good
matches.
job somewhere else, though.
Maybe,
I'm sure
maybe,
he'll be all right.
maybe. But if he'd said what he said about other people who had been born a certain way, had been born black, or had been born gay, we wouldn't even be debating this, would we? He would have gone into ignominy, absolute ignominy, the way that Ron Atkinson has. The only reason there's a debate about it is because it was women that he was insulting. And actually, wrongly, as it turned out, because the woman turned out to know the offside rule impeccably. And the controversial decision that she made turned out to be absolutely correct, despite the sneering of her critics. But here's the rub, Laurie. In saying what you're saying, you have found yourself in some very strange company. I don't know if you heard what I said at the beginning, but the Daily Star, the Sun, no doubt the News of the World and other gutter newspapers, whose very essence is sexism and bigotry,
Absolutely,
are also lining up to kick these two men. What do we say about that?
I think it's very, very interesting. I mean, it might be seen, in 5 or 6 years or however many years, as a kind of sea change when you get, these kind of nasty tabloid papers, even they're joining in because they can see the way the public opinion's going. But I just think it's so ironic, really, that you have the Sun saying, "Oh, Andy Gray's sexist. Now let's look at page 3 and look at the young girls with their news in briefs." It's I think it's absolutely shocking, really. But on the point that you made about, would we be saying this if it was a person who was black or a person who was gay, I think that's a very interesting point, and it's been raised before. Because on the one hand, I think when you're talking about privilege and you're talking about people who are white or straight or male or any combination of those things, talking about people who are less privileged in those respects, one has to be very careful, because I've made sweeping statements before, like, oh, you know, you wouldn't say this if you were talking about black people, and, you know, been rightly brought up and said, actually, it's not quite the same. On the other hand, I do think it's a very valid point to make that there is a level, you know, still in society where sexism is still very normalised, and it's not taboo in the same way that in some circles racism is, and rightly so, and homophobia is, and rightly so. You can get away with a lot more sexism purely because, you know, it's very deeply ingrained in society.
Isn't there another reason, though, why you can sometimes get away with it? And that is that women can be sexist too. And that if one secretly recorded, not for broadcasting, comments of some women, I mean, I've never seen the programme, but people talk about a programme called Loose Women. And they have said that the off-air banter of those women about men might also surprise us.
Oh, I think women often do talk in a derogatory way about men, but I mean, you have to understand this in the context in which I think a lot of men, when they hear women making these sort of comments, think that, oh, it's just fair enough. You know, we say things about women, women say things about men. But it's not women. If you're talking about, you know, people making comments about women not being able to do their jobs, it's not women who are, you know, for example, still the subject of quite a large pay gap. It's not women who are routinely making complaints about sexual harassment and allegations of even rape in the workplace. It's not women, you know, who are being continually marginalised out of big decision-making roles in workplaces of every kind, you know, all over the country. And the systematic discrimination, I think it would be lovely. It would be lovely to think that we lived in a world where, you know, gender equality is all sorted out, and, you know, there's no kind of sexual power imbalance or gender power imbalance at work or at home. And if that was the case, then maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal that, you know, we make these comments about each other. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't live in that world yet. I mean, hopefully, you know, in my lifetime we will live in that world, but we don't yet. And I think it's, you know, and I think because we don't, then there is that disparity. And you can't just compare women making sexist comments about men, which, you know, are sexist. I'm not claiming that. Like you, I've never really seen Loose Women either. But, you know, I get the gist of what it is. I think it's that kind of sleazy sort of, talking about men in a sort of sexually derogatory context. But I don't think you can draw that equivalence, not quite yet.
Because men have the power. It's like it's like the allegation of black racism against whites.
Absolutely.
It falls at the hurdle that black people are overwhelmingly the bottom dogs in this society. They are the people put upon, they are the people oppressed, they are the people discriminated against, they are the people with least power. It's the top dogs that hand out discrimination and bigotry in a much more effective way, if you like. Men can effectively damage women and their lives by discriminating against them. Very few women can do the same to men.
And if you're talking about sexual comments and comments like the second comment that came out, you know, sexually derogatory comments, you know, reducing someone to their sexual appearance. You know, I'm sure those comments are made about men as well, but the simple fact is that men don't live in a world where, you know, for example, if there's a rapist on the street, men aren't told that they shouldn't leave the house. You know, men don't have to, you know, look twice down the street before they walk down it alone because they're frightened they might get raped. Men don't live in a world of sexual threat in the way that women do. And so the context is entirely different. And again, I wish it weren't the case. I wish this all could be, you know, light, friendly banter, but unfortunately it's just not.
Laurie Penny, I told you, she's a very bright young woman, New Statesman blogger and columnist, and that's her point of view on the Richard Keys Andy Gray row. We'll be talking to her diametric opposite, Katie Hopkins, a businesswoman from Apprentice 3 and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, after this.